Hey everybody, Invisiblekatana here, doing a Guy on Games review for Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry. I just did my review for Assassin's Creed Liberation, but been going through recently I'd say past 2 months or so, past 2-3 months. No, not even 3, it would be the past 2 months. Been going through some of my old Steam games, building up, going through all the Assassin's Creed games now that we're going into Assassin's Creed Origins, and I was like, I've been behind for a super long time. I haven't played Unity, I haven't played Syndicate as like the main games. The last thing I played was Assassin's Creed Rogue. So I got 2 of them on Steam, and the other 2 I have on my PS4. And I got Liberation and then Freedom Cry on Steam, and then of course the 2 main with Unity and Syndicate on console. And going through Freedom Cry, I was pretty excited because I basically downloaded Freedom Cry and Liberation at the same time, and I was like, alright, I'm just going to go in order of the games, and that's pretty much how I'm going to play them. So went through, did Liberation. I was like, okay, that's the PSP game. That was the counter Assassin's Creed game to Assassin's Creed 3. And then you have Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry, which is not really the partner game because technically they made it after Assassin's Creed 4 officially came out. And it was like, hey, here's a cool standalone DLC where instead of playing with Connor, or what is it, Edward Kenway from Assassin's Creed 4, you play as Adewale, who was like the official assassin, because that was a big thing with 4, where it was like, he was never really an assassin, he was just a pirate who had, the blades. Still an awesome game though. But this was like the official Assassin's Creed 4, because Adewale was 100% an assassin. And I really loved the story for this one. I thought it was pretty fun. It brings in the elements of Assassin's Creed 4 with actually being on the boat. You can go across to different islands and stuff. It's, of course, a much smaller map compared to 4, but there's still multiple islands. I want to say there's the main island, and then I think there are 2 other like main islands that have like plantations on them, and then there's like one of the tiny little waypoint items where it's just you get there as one treasure chest and then you leave, and it's like, here's a fast travel point, which is totally pointless. I mean, I guess it's useful if you don't keep going outward. If you go just to that one island and turn right back, I guess it's useful. But other than that, it was just, here's a chest and that's it. But you can go underwater. You can attack boats on the sea, and it was definitely cool. I was like, okay, they have all the elements, just a smaller space, but you can still find a million different boats that you can attack if you want to. And I thought that was actually very cool. And of course, the story kicks off with. And there will be spoilers in this, but I'll let you guys know when I'll get to like official spoilers. But the story kicks off with Adewale, and he's on a boat. Basically, there's a crazy storm. It's actually a pretty cool start to the game because it was just like really, like it throws you right in, and it's like you're fighting, and then this crazy storm happens in the middle of this fight. And so basically, the whole thing gets destroyed, and Adewale washes up on this beach, and now he's on this island. And it's like, okay, well, boom, here's the story. Like, he's on this island, he's kind of building himself back up so that he can leave and kind of rejoin the assassins. And then they get, he gets into this story of how he's basically surrounded by slave owners, and there's plantations on the main island. I think there were 2 on the main island, and then there's some on the other islands as well. And so he gets wrapped up in this story of helping these people basically build a rebellion against slave owners and stuff like that. And I thought, of course, that was very cool. And it has all the same elements of Assassin's Creed 4. All the same weapons are there, but of course it adds its own element, which is the plantation stuff and building. And this, they've kind of had this before, where you have your own little army and stuff like that, but you build up the Maroons, I believe they were called. And I thought that was a really cool element. Like, you would go in, and it starts off in one way where in order to save a plantation, it was like you have to take out so many people in the plantation, and then after a while it switched up, and then you had to do like something else specific to end up saving the plantations and saving all the slaves. But I thought it was very fun. I was like, this is pretty cool. You go through, and it's a cool way to kind of sneak around, and you take people out and stuff like that, and that's how you save plantations. And people get recruited. You get rewards for every plantation you save. So you save a certain amount of, get a certain amount of slaves that you saved, and you would get like different unlockables. You get, ammunition pouches, medicine pouches. You would get little stuff for the bow. There's one that ended up being like a whole weapon that you would get, and that comes in the form of Maroon recruits. So the slaves rescued had their own list, and then the Maroon recruits had their own list of bonus items that you would unlock as well, based on how many slaves you saved and how many people you recruited. So each list would kind of build up as you went throughout the game. And I thought that was pretty fun. I was like, that's a very cool way to do that. It gives you incentive to do it for sure. The story I think was pretty entertaining. It was definitely a decent length. Like this, I believe was, I want to say like 6 GB or something like that. And I remember because I downloaded this in Liberation at the same time. Liberation I think was like 2 GB or something, and it downloaded super fast. It may have been like 1 point something, and this was like 6. And I was like, wow, that's a huge difference. And I think mostly it comes in the form of just the expansiveness of the game. Because I feel like the story itself, I kind of flew through the story. And it was, partly because I was definitely playing the game a lot. But I also did a lot of like the plantation stuff. I would go through not a ton of side missions. Really, I feel like there are kind of no side missions in this game at all. Which I feel like even Liberation had that a little bit. Where it was like, okay, here's a random thing where you just kill this one person. And for Freedom Cry, they didn't really have that. They still had, you could go out and do stuff, of course, with it being, slightly open world. You could, well, it was completely open world, just a smaller open world than 4. You could still go out on the water and do the different missions and find all the chests, and you could still go underwater. They still had those portions as well. They just didn't really have any side missions. And it kind of fits the story because pretty much everyone that you work with are either slaves or it's this one specific woman who is basically trying to help the slaves, but she's also kind of working for the Templars, and she's this black woman who's kind of stuck in the middle of, the Templars and then helping slaves and stuff like that. So it makes sense that there aren't any side stories, but, excuse me, but it does make it fly through. Like, you will fly through that game super fast because, like other Assassin's Creed games, you might distract yourself, even if it's just for an hour or so, you might distract yourself with side missions, and this game has none of that. But they do have side elements. Like I said, the plantation stuff, some of that you have to do because you get, at a certain point you have to, like, save the plantation owners or save the slaves from the plantation and get up to a certain amount of slaves freed and recruited Maroons. But there are also elements where you'll just go through the world, and of course this is an island full of slave owners, and auctioneers and things like that, and there'll be tons of portions where, they aren't necessarily missions, but they're, the side activities. And so you'll have, a slave that's injured and you have to carry them to a secret location. You'll have a slave that's running away from, like, an enforcer or whatever, and you kill the enforcer chasing after them and you help free the slave that way. They have slaves on, that are being sold, and they'll be up on, like, this stage, and there'll be, like, 4 guys. And then you basically jump down into this crowd, or, however you want to do it. But you jump down and you kill all the bad guys off, and then you help free those slaves. So they do have side missions, and or side activities. Like I said, they aren't necessarily missions because you can totally ignore them. There's never a time where it comes up and you have to do it. It's just like, a little marker comes up and it's like, hey, you can kill these guys off. This slave is injured, so you carry him to a secret location. If you want to help free these slaves, you kill this person and steal the key and unlock the cage, and then that helps them get free. But those are, like, totally optional. I did a bunch of those because otherwise you really would just be flying through the game. But also, then, I'm not going to lie, it's probably because I'm black. I've never felt more of a need to actually, like, kill all the enemies in the game because they're, like, all slave owners. Typically it's like, oh, this is just, like, some douchebag gang member or some Templar. And I don't know. I mean, like I said, I'm black, so maybe it was just, like, a huge part of it was, like, even though it's virtual, it was just there. It's like a much greater connection than to, like, just taking, like, oh, they're just random enemies. These are, like, slave owners. Like, basically their job was to, like, tear people down. Like other Assassin's Creed games, it was like, yeah, these are the bad guys, but they're the bad guys because they're fighting against us or whatever. It's like, these people, even if they don't attack me, they're the bad guys no matter what they do. So it's just interesting. It was like, like I said, that, of course, me being black, totally different connection than what other people might have. But it was interesting going through, and you, like I said, you fight through the plantations, and the story continues to build up. You help build this rebellion, and it's just building up continuously. And I thought it was really fun. I like the way it played out. And this is where I'm going to get into official spoilers, even though there's not too much to spoil. I'll be totally honest. There's not a ton to spoil with this, because it's kind of clear how the story's going to go, from the beginning. But this is official spoiler warning for anyone who has not played Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry. I know it actually came out on PlayStation Plus like last month, and I was like, well, that's interesting. Just as I'm kind of going through and playing it, that's when it finally comes up on PlayStation Plus. So I'm sure a lot of people just now started to check that out. So highly recommend it if you haven't gotten the game. Of course, it's too late to get on PlayStation Plus currently. But if you know a friend who may have downloaded it, I highly recommend you play it. It's definitely a fun game. Or if you just want to buy it like I did, it's, it's like, it's expansive enough where it became its own kind of standalone game. And it's definitely deserving of it because it has, like I said, the open expanse, just not nearly as open. You have your main location, and you pretty much do stick in this one town. That's like the one thing is that you stick in this one town like the whole game, and then the other two islands you only really go to for specific stuff. It's like, okay, this island, maybe you have to, save these slaves from this one plantation. And that's pretty much it. There's like two other islands, but you stay in like one location the whole time. And it's still entertaining. It just really is like the same place like all the way through. Like even Assassin's Creed Liberation, which was initially made as a PSP game, had like 3 separate locations that you could go to. And in this one, even though you could travel to those other islands, there was nothing there. It was like the main island, which was a fairly decent size. It was like there were 2 plantations, I believe, on either side of the island. And then, of course, eventually as you go through and you have the rebellion building up, the Maroons, they have their own secret hideout. So it's fairly expansive, but it was still just like, after going through the game, it was like, I have come across, like, before I get into spoilers, the slaves on sale thing that I mentioned, that's in one location. Unless I missed it in a different part of the game or a different part of the island or something, there's literally one location where you see slaves on sale. So that would repeat over and over again. So that side mission, it was exactly the same every time, or that little activity. It was the same thing where it was 4 slaves on this stage, and then you would just kill the people that are around them. There was a church that was like right next to it, and it would be 2 slaves being beaten by these guys, and those same 2 things would always repeat. Those were like the set locations, guaranteed. There would be slaves on sale when you restart the game, and those 2 slaves will be like tied to the church, and they'll be getting beaten. And those same 2 things, that's like the only location where that actually happens. And like I said, that's what I saw, and I was playing through like the whole campaign. That's what I saw. Like there was no other block where slaves were being sold at or anything like that. As far as slaves being chased, that would show up at random, and there were different locations. There was enough variety as far as like the slaves being in the cages. That was always the same as well because the cages never moved. But there was enough variety in that. They would show up in like multiple locations on the island. But the selling thing, literally in one location. So it would kind of repeat itself, and you would go through the same thing because there was only one place really that you would ever go to start missions, and it was like the same place to meet the woman who was like the black woman who was working for the Templars, and she was basically like the madam at a bordello. That's pretty much what she was, and that is where pretty much every single mission would start. So there was a lot of repetition as far as what you would see. Even going through the missions, you would go through like a certain location. It's like, all right, seen that selling block 100 million times, but for me, I would still stop by, take out the guys, free the slaves, and keep going. But you would see the same thing a lot because the missions always started at the bordello. There are a couple of missions that would start in other locations as well, because there are some different places you go to. But for the most part, I would say that was like the biggest downside to the game, is that there really isn't that much variety. Even though you can travel to other islands, there's not much to see or do there outside of, here's this one mission that's on this other island that you travel to, or here's a mission. Some missions, of course, do take place on the boats, but for the most part, you will see the same stuff over and over again, because it's like, all right, I start here when the game loads up. My mission is in the same place as it's always been, so I'm going to run past these same couple of buildings over and over. And it didn't really bother me at the time. Honestly, I didn't even think about it until doing this review, that I constantly went through the same locations. But while I was playing it, it didn't bother me whatsoever. So it might bother you now that I've mentioned it and you've heard me say it. You'll notice just how many times you go past the same stuff, because the missions really are always at that bordello. It's either there, somewhere at the Maroon hideout, and like I said, there's like a couple that might be in other locations as well. But for the most part, fairly repetitive as far as what you see on the island, but it is a big island. You can definitely travel around if you want to. But as far as like going through the campaign, you will go through the same couple of locations over and over again, because you'll keep going back to the plantations as well, because they constantly like start over so you can save more and more slaves too. So you go to the same plantations to save people. You'll constantly go to the bordello to get the same mission. You'll go to the Maroon hideout and stuff like that. And then on the water is kind of where things really change up, because you can find this boat or that boat. Some boats are slave boats, which you can also rescue. You got to be careful with that, because if you damage the boats too much, of course, you'll kill the slaves. So it was an interesting dynamic there, trying not to do too much damage to the boat so you can actually get onto the boat and help the slaves. So I thought that was a cool little dynamic there, where you couldn't do too much damage or you would kill the slaves. There would always be like a mark, like this is how many slaves there are. And then if you killed them, it would be like, well, now that number, like 0 out of 2 saved, would drop down to 0 out of 1 because you killed one of the slaves. So I thought that was definitely a cool concept. But officially, going into spoilers now, I didn't realize I had that much extra to talk about. That was just base concept stuff. Still recommend it. Like I said, if you haven't checked it out, it's definitely still a really fun game to play, and I think it's definitely entertaining. But going into the full spoilers of the game as far as the end of it and the story and things like that, I thought it was really simple. Very fun. You go through, you build this rebellion, and it really does end kind of how you would think it would end, because it's like, well, the whole point was Adewale is here, he's kind of waiting for the assassins, and then things build up and he's able to kind of leave on his own. But ultimately it's like, well, yeah, he knew he was leaving the whole time. He helped build this rebellion, and it's like, I'll help you guys build this rebellion, and then I'll take off, when I think that you all can be free. And the whole point, of course, was he used to be a slave, and so he wants to do everything he can to help free these other slaves and build this rebellion to help every single slave fight back for freedom. And I thought that was a really cool concept. It was very simple, and his relationship with the madam, and of course I don't remember anyone's name outside of Adewale's, but his relationship with her I thought was interesting because she was so in with the Templars, and then he comes in and is like, how can you do this? You're basically helping Templars who are, making more work for slaves. And I thought it was really cool. And, their relationship as it built up, and her helping him fight back and build up this rebellion. And then things get super crazy during, like, the mission before last, where you go on the actual slave boat, and things just get really, really crazy. You try to free some slaves, then the ship starts to sink, and it's just really bad, and a bunch of people die. And have this really great emotional moment, which I wasn't expecting it to ever truly get that emotional story-wise, but they finally do, like, right at the end, after that mission, where, like, all these slaves end up dying because everyone was kind of doing their own thing. It was like, you have the Maroon leader who's like, hey, we have to do this specific thing, and then you have the Madam where she's like, we have to do it this way or that way, and then Adewale is just like, kill all the slave owners. After that, we're freeing all the slaves. And that was pretty much it. He had like a very hardcore stance about it. And that even sticks to the end of the game when you kill like the final boss, and he says, if some stupid super racist thing where it's like, if we didn't have slaves, then they would grow up to be super angry and fight back like you do. And he had a great line where he was like, I wish that were true. And he kills the guy because it was like all he wanted the whole game was for every slave to fight back and for everyone to, rally together, like the freedom cry. So I thought that was actually a really great line. But I like that moment after that mission, and they have like this, like basically it's like a mass grave. They have all these different graves for all the people that died, all the slaves that were killed during that mission that you play. And I thought that was a really good moment, and that's where everything kind of came together right before that final mission, where it's like everyone sees like the error of their ways, where basically the Maroon guy was the one who was like completely calm about exactly what they should do. Adewale was just like, we have to go for this, and the Madam was still just like, oh well, they're bad, but they aren't as bad as this, and she'd never realized it until that point. And I thought that was a good moment where, through the whole game, that was like their bit of contention, mostly between Adewale and the Madam. And then all that comes together, and they're both like, crap, we were both wrong, we should have listened to you, because you told me not to kind of fly off the cuff and attack the boat. And the Madam didn't listen to Adewale while he wasn't listening to someone else, and she's like, well, I should have listened to you as well, because you were right about how horrible this guy really was. So I like that moment. It was a nice bit of emotion that they kind of had in there towards the end of the game. And then, of course, you beat the slave owner, and that's like, if I remember it correctly, that's like the only part where they actually have the Assassin's Creed like sequence where you kill someone and then you actually talk. I could be wrong about that. I'm sure, because I know that there are a couple of targets in the game. I just can't remember if they actually were important enough to have that sequence, or if it was just like, just kill this person and then you move on. But I feel like that was the only actual moment where that happened, where you kill that specific guy, and then you get like the full sequence where they talk in like the animus space, I guess. But it was definitely awesome. I thought it was a nice way to end it. And then of course it's like, alright, well, I can no longer stay here because the slaves will be in danger and the Maroons and everything. So it was a decent way to end it. It was, kind of what you would expect. You beat the final bad guy, the most horrible person there. And then he's like, alright, well, that's like my final mission, and then I'm taken off to be with the assassins again, and I leave you guys to continue on the rebellion. So I thought it was a pretty cool way to end it. Like I said, definitely a fun game for sure. Would highly recommend it to anyone who likes Assassin's Creed. And like I said, despite its repetition, I didn't notice that. Like when I was actually playing the game, never realized how much, like I noticed where it was like, okay, I'm coming across the block, but I would never get bored by it. It was like, all right, I'm saving these two guys at the church again, and right next to the church is like that open space where they're trying to sell the slaves, and then I'm going to jump into that and kill those guys and free those slaves. And I did that, I don't know how many times, but it never felt super repetitive because I guess just because it was still entertaining, and that added connection of like you're helping free slaves. This wasn't like, oh, you're just killing the bad guys that you randomly come across. Like, they're literally doing nothing. In this game, they're always doing something horrible. Like, they're either beating on the slaves, or the slaves are locked up, or they're selling the slaves, or chasing the slaves. And it always has, like, this extra level of, depth to it. Like, it's a lot more, it feels way more important than, like, the other Assassin's Creed games where it's like, oh, those are just the enemies. I can do a cool kill right here. You're always helping someone when you kill the enemies, or at least you typically are. Most of the time I encounter enemies, it was because they were involved with the slaves. So it's just interesting, like how it has that connection, which of course not everyone's gonna have, like I said. But I really enjoyed it. A part of me enjoyed it for that, but also with what they had, like I said, even with that repetitiveness, I never felt it. And that could be because of the connection that I had. That it was just like I'm helping free these virtual slaves and stuff. So different levels and different feelings for different people. So it could be different for everybody, and I'm sure it would be, but I definitely enjoyed it. I thought it was a nice standalone story. Like I said, would definitely recommend it for anyone who hasn't played it and hasn't checked it out. Of course, we'd love to know what you guys thought about this standalone game, so please comment below. Let me know your favorite parts about it, your least favorite parts about it. I'm going to be moving on to my review for Assassin's Creed Unity next. I'm going to do that right after this. Probably get a drink first because my throat's getting a little dry. But if you guys are going to put comments, do put a spoiler tag. I mentioned that in my Liberation thing. I was like, I didn't know if I should, but considering in my own video I say when there's going to be spoilers, I guess I should ask you guys to do the same. Even with the game being old, I'm just now playing it, so I'm sure there are other people that are just now playing it or still haven't gotten to playing it yet. But I definitely loved it. Like I said, that connection with the character being black and freeing slaves, totally different connection for me than it would be for someone of a different race. But I really enjoyed it for that, and just as an Assassin's Creed game, it's still very fun. It's definitely a great story, and has the smaller version of 4, where you can still go on the water, go to the different islands, still go underwater and stuff like that. So definitely a great job with it, and it's it's a lot like Assassin's Creed 4, even though Adewale was with the Brotherhood. This was still very standalone from the actual Brotherhood. It was a lot like Liberation, where it's just like, here's a story. Technically, you're an assassin, but this is actually more detached than Liberation is. That's actually really involved with the Assassins and Templars, but still really great. It was just a cool assassin story. But we'd love to know what you guys thought about it, so please put your comments down in the comment section below. And of course, thanks for watching.